Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. This program defines concepts in current media. I'm the author of 4 books of philosophy, one of which is The Nature of Aesthetics. These books are available free for viewing online at www.philosophypublishing.com. Well, along with me is my co-host and colleague, Rick Samuelson. Rick is graduated. He graduated from Yale and Wharton and is a venture capitalist out on the West Coast. Great to see you, Rick.
Good to see you.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature and concepts being used in current media and compare the essence of the concept with the usage and circumstances in which the term is being used. And this week we're going to discuss something that the WikiLeaks have brought up, that the left seeks its vocation in not only government, media, and education, and there's tremendous collusion between the Democratic, the DNC, and these areas of interest of the left, particularly in the media, and in the universities. So why must the left go to the universities, and why must the left go to the media, and why must the left go into education, and what drives them to do that? The left has a deep necessity to turn to these 3 functions, these 3 areas for their professional vocation. And I'd like to put forth that the origin of this feeling within the left emanates from his desire and passion for justice, particularly social justice. So the first thing we need to do now really is to define what is justice. Well, justice is the upholding and consummation of a contract. So now we have to determine what is a contract or agreement or a covenant. And this is the description, that is a contract is a description of an obligation and a right for 2 or more entities. An agreement for 2 or more parties is the establishment of for each party to have at least one obligation and one right. The obligation is the necessity that one must do something for another, and the right is the consummation of receiving the obligation from the other side. For each entity with the contract, then there are 2 rights and 2 entities. One right to receive and one obligation to give, and they exist on both sides of the contract. Now, an injustice is the interruption of the consummation of these rights and the applications within these covenants and agreements. And by the way, the purpose of the contract or agreement or a covenant is to promote cooperation, and which necessitates or helps the production of goods and services in order to make ourselves more comfortable in life, to bring us more betterment. We cooperate to give ourselves a better life and greater benefit and betterment that we want for our lives. So now we'll need to ask about what is social injustice. Individuals have a contract with society and with government. The social injustice, when this contract is violated, when the rights and obligations are not consummated properly, you get social injustice. An example of this would be when not everybody is treated equally before the law. Another example of this, and well known as it is when one class of people must sit in the back of the bus. Obviously, it's an injustice and a violation of the social contract. But in actuality, it was the Republicans that were the initiators of the solutions to the problems of social injustice, which started way back with the party of Abraham Lincoln. Republicans were always against social injustice, fighting the wrongs of society, from the 1860s until today. However, recently, the mantle of this social justice has come to be seen as a Democrat issue. Be that as it is, the Democrats in earnest have social justice as a prime objective. All Democrats now are concerned with the utopian vision of a society without social injustice. They are driven to this through their aesthetic sense, which tells them that the utopian dream of social justice is the most important issue before all of society. Okay, so now let's go back to the problem of why the left likes to go toward its vocation in media, education, and government. Or actually, they're really kind of driven to go into education, media, and government for their profession. They're consumed with it. But some of you might go, hey, but wait. Ostensibly, both the left and the rightist both want justice. It's a laudable course to follow for anybody. Naturally, one wants all contracts that promote cooperation for the betterment of life to be consummated. So what makes the leftists particularly interested in justice and particularly interested in social justice? It is that the progressive, utopian, socialist Democrats believe that the other guy with which one is cooperating is inherently bad. This means that the progressive, utopian, and socialist Democrat gravitates to social justice through his aesthetic sense and through the fact that he believes all of other people are inherently bad. And these bad people need to be regulated and observed so that they cannot exploit others. And as this all others means those who are not progressive, utopian, socialist Democrats, they are all bad. And that means a tremendous percentage of the entire population be inherently bad. As we see, the deplorables, as Hillary has pointed out. Thus, for these Democrats, it is an overwhelming, all-consuming objective to establish social justice. Therefore, they become unified against all those non-progressive Democrats through the objective of permeating society with their social justice ideas. Republicans, on the other hand, don't have such overwhelming objectives centered around one idea, such as social justice. Therefore, when an issue comes up of immediate importance, they can be scattered and not in unison with their objectives. Republicans feel naturally that the other person is going errantly, and by his nature, inherently, by the other person is inherently good, and by his nature he's essentially good. So consequently, they do not have the one central objective as the Democrats do. And so when an issue comes up, they can be divided and their conversation and polemics scattered hither and yon. So let's see what Rick has to say about what all this collusion means between the Democrats and their various sections of media and employment and what does it mean for the election? Rick, what do you think?
Well, I think the most powerful tool that the Democrats have actually are the unions. Funding is one obvious advantage union dues for the particularly government employees, because unionized government employees now outnumber manufacturing employees, and so this trend over many years, whereby the manufacturing unions have shrunken and the government-related public sector unions have grown, has created this massive conflict of interest. So you have government unions essentially funding the growth of government. That they aren't called out for that more often remains astonishing to me. But that allows them to not only fund their campaign, along with others, that I'll refer to in a second, but also provides the manpower. Even locally, we see it all the time. The actual people put up the Democrat signs are union members. And in many cases, they're paid to do that. Whereas with Republicans, it's almost always volunteers. And it's very difficult for a volunteer army to keep up with, a paid, interested group that is organized as well as union labor is. So that's one huge advantage, and it's a big change since I was a kid, when the public sector unions were relatively small compared to the manufacturing unions, where there is not this huge conflict of interest, because union workers in a manufacturing union want the economy to grow, fundamentally, right? They want their right, they want their ability to bargain, but they also want the economy to grow. That's not necessarily true of public sector unions. As long as the government's getting an ever larger slice of the economy, that at a very fundamental level suits them fine. As far as the media are concerned, Brent Bozell with MRC Action has been pointing out for years the liberal bias that's grown over time. You might argue that Fox News never would have arisen and become so popular had it not been for the leftward drift of the media over time. I mean, we've come a long way since the days of Walter Cronkite, when the ideal of both the newspaper, print media, and televised and radio media was to present the facts, right? That was the highest calling for journalism. Well, that's obviously gone completely by the wayside. Facts are selectively chosen to represent this or that candidate in a good or bad light. If you look at the Sunday edition of the New York Times, the editorial section, you won't see any articles critical of Hillary Clinton. It's all critical of Donald Trump, article after article after article. And the most they'll say about Hillary Clinton is that, she has her flaws. And no really detailed analysis of the enormous wrongdoing that she's done, which would have put so many others in jail, frankly. So there is that. And then I think you've had, with the universities, not as extreme a leftward drift. I think the universities have been left for years on balance. I don't think the university system was ever, except with selected colleges, conservatively focused. But what has happened, notwithstanding the editorial of the president of Yale this morning, contending that free speech is well protected at Yale, the mission on the part of not only students but also certain selected faculty to actually mute free speech by providing protected spaces and talking in terms of inclusiveness and framing every debate in terms of racial discrimination, framing every literary work in terms of racial discrimination or social injustice or what have you. I mean, this has trended in only one direction for many years now. So this tendency to, if not shut down the conservative point of view, minimize it to the greatest degree possible has become more extreme over time. Although I would say on balance, the shift in the unions and the shift in the media has been greater, say, over the last 50 years.
And so does Yale really have free speech?
Well, they would say that to the extent that they don't disinvite speakers. There are many universities, Smith, Brandeis, Duke, that have actively disinvited certain speakers because of protests from the students. And so, the President Salovey of Yale, in not mentioning those egregious acts, is kind of playing dumb deliberately, because he knows there's a problem, broadly speaking, within the university environment, and that's simply a manifestation of it. And the evidence is clear; it's unambiguous. But the fact that the Buckley program is really the only forum where conservative viewpoints are aired speaks volumes, right? And the Buckley program was not formed by Yale itself. It was formed by a graduate of Yale who took it upon herself, Laura Noble, in view of what she was seeing at Yale in terms of the lack of true liberal thinking, right? The lack of a diversity of views, to form the Buckley Forum in order to enhance the debate. So obviously, and by the way, the alumni have gladly funded the program. They have written numerous letters in support of it. It's been a huge boon from the alumni perspective to the atmosphere of debate on the Yale campus on important issues. And not to make mention of that, not to make mention of the fact that the Buckley program grew out of a perceived lack of diversity of viewpoint, is again playing dumb on the part of the Yale president.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you mentioned that the editorials of the New York Times are almost entirely against Trump and barely mention Hillary, but I have to admit that not only that, but the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, which leans conservatively to the right, also doesn't favor Trump too much either. So I guess everybody's against Trump on the established editorial boards of the papers throughout. I guess one, the Investors Business Daily is clearly on the Trump side.
Well, curiously enough, David Glertner, who's a professor of computer science at Yale, been there many years, wrote a very impressive editorial in favor of voting for Trump, not on the merits of his personality, and the man's obviously flawed, but just because a Clinton presidency would be disastrous. And that argument remains very, very compelling, and he articulated it very, very well. It makes great reading. It was a couple of days ago in the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
A Yale professor.
Whoa. All right. And, okay, well, thanks very much. And I think we've hit the topic fairly well, and we'll see everybody in a few days for another episode of The Philosophical Angle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.